Think of Obi as the kayak for rideshare. It's a place
Mhm.
where consumers can download an app, compare prices and ETA across the major rideshare providers in their geography. We're in 175 countries. We've shot past a million users, have a heavy presence, of course, in the United States, but are expanding globally. Obi is one of the experts on rideshare pricing
Mhm.
because we have so many consumers using our app on a monthly basis. And we have built some really strong pricing analytics and pricing products that are used by rideshare companies, banks and financial institutions, and governments as well.
Before we jump into today's episode, I've got some exciting news to share. Our first Urban Autonomy Summit, presented by Nexar, is happening on Wednesday, October 8th at New Lab in Brooklyn. New York City is at an inflection point. Autonomous vehicles are here, and they're already navigating big city streets. And with the likes of Waymo, Tesla, Zoox, Wave, and more all testing in dense urban cores, NYC and other megalopolises face urgent questions around safe operations, equity, and integration with existing urban transport systems. So now is the time for a critical discussion to shape AV deployments. If you're interested, please apply to attend using the link in the show notes. Space is limited, so make sure you apply ASAP. Ashwini Anburajan is the Chief Executive Officer of Obi, the world's leading rideshare price aggregation app. At Obi, she is focused on expanding their presence internationally and establishing it as the authoritative voice on rideshare data and analytics. Ashwini is a serial entrepreneur, startup operator, and investor. In her prior role leading business development at Upside, she is credited for creating category-defining deals in rideshare to improve driver incentives and lower their costs. In her spare time, she's a venture investor with Side Door Ventures, where she invests in ambitious founders at the pre-seed stage and also angel invests in passion projects in the arts and on Broadway. Ashwini, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Harry. It's so funny because you mentioned Upside. The first time I ever heard of you or encountered your work was when I was at Upside leading business development on the consumer side. So it's fun to be here again in a completely different capacity.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed about the mobility, rideshare, delivery, scooter, AV space is that, once you sort of get in the industry and make some footholds, right, you kind of bounce around or, you kind of do adjacent businesses. Yeah, Upside, I think, was probably one of our top affiliate partners. I want to say we were doing tens of thousands of conversions a month at one point in the heyday. So I'm a big fan of Upside. Yeah. So now that you mentioned it, love the company, love that you work there. And I'm excited to chat about what you're up to at Obi and also your new role as the CEO. So I guess let's take a moment to say
Yeah.
congrats on that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I've been at Obi. I joined as Chief Revenue Officer in October 2023 and excited to have stepped into the role as of August 1st as CEO.
Definitely. And I guess I should also mention or disclose that I am an advisor for Obi, and I actually started working with Payam and Nick from the team. I want to say I'm going to look up on my LinkedIn right now, but I feel like it might have been 8 or 9 years ago, long before even people were talking about AVs, or I guess the first time. So it's funny to sort of see a lot of this come full circle. I guess 7 years and 3 months has been
Okay.
my role with the team, but obviously cool to see everything that you guys are up to. And obviously you've kind of outgrown, some of my support, but from the early days, but cool to see what you're up to.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that support. It's been huge. So we
Yeah.
appreciate it.
So for those, I gave a little brief intro of Obi, but for those who don't know, what does the company do and what are you focused on as the new CEO?
Yeah. So think of Obi as the kayak for rideshare. It's a place
Hmm.
where consumers can download an app, compare prices and ETA across the major rideshare providers in their geography. We're in 175 countries. We've shot past a million users, have a heavy presence, of course, in the United States, but are expanding globally pretty rapidly as well. In addition to that, what a lot of people don't know is Obi is one of the experts on rideshare pricing
Hmm.
because we have so many consumers using our app on a monthly basis. And we have built some really strong pricing analytics and pricing products that are used by rideshare companies, banks and financial institutions, and governments as well.
Interesting. So would it be fair to say that it's kind of a B2C app and product? Users get a lot of value out of it. It's free. They compare prices. And then you guys, the business, I guess, side of things is sort of taking a lot of that data and, working with partners in the rideshare space or banks. I mean, the app is basically 100% free. You guys don't make money off the users.
We don't make money off the users in terms we don't charge subscriptions, we don't make affiliate revenue when you book a ride. Maybe that changes in the future, but that's not the case right now. So it's free to use, and we do a lot with the data on the back end.
Got it. So I think one of the reasons why I was so excited to hear about Obi 7 years ago was because as a driver, I mean, the first thing I always tell drivers is download both Uber, sign up for Lyft. You always want to have that backup. And that principle applies also on the customer side. I've found, just in every city that I'm in, sometimes Lyft is more expensive. Sometimes, here in LA, like I always feel like Lyft is less expensive. So I tend to go with Lyft. Whenever I go to San Francisco, though, Lyft is always more than Uber. And so I think this concept, I don't know if people realize just how much, kind of price differentials there are for the same ride, the same time. I mean, can you talk a little bit about what does the data say? Like, can it be 50% different? And I guess also, why is it so different?
Yeah, of course. So I would say a few years ago, we were seeing a 30% price difference on average of what a consumer could save using
Hmm.
using the app. And we know from a lot of consumer behavioral testing and research from our usage that a dollar is enough to drive a consumer from one provider to another.
Yeah.
There are real differences in geographies. So of course it helps to understand that. In a market like New York City, these apps are usually, 50 cents to $1.10 apart. That's
Mm,
it. Like,
pretty close.
most of the time until you get to like supply and demand issues, big weather events,
Hmm.
things like that. And then you can start to see real differences between it. But overall, now these days, I would say that our average price difference is about 20%
Hmm.
between the two apps, Uber and Lyft. And it can vary even far more widely outside the US, right? So then you can see 30, 40, 50% price
What's
difference.
the
And
average
these
cost?
days with Waymo, Harry, this is
Yeah.
actually interesting. You can see Waymo, it's twice the price
Oh, wow.
of both Uber and Lyft sometimes. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about how Waymo throws a wrench into all of this pricing. But what's the average cost of a ride these days? And I guess which service is, across the board on average cheaper, Uber or Lyft?
I wouldn't I don't think you can say one is overall cheaper
Hmm.
than the other. Sometimes I think, like, Uber skews slightly cheaper.
Hmm.
But, we're using data from major metropolitan markets, and our audience obviously is highly in the US. So I would say, speaking to the US market overall, I would say Uber is often the cheaper option. Not the case in
Hmm.
Europe, for example. If you're in Europe, it's Bolt is often the cheaper option, right? That you're going to use. But in markets like the US, like our difference in price, an average ride, most cases is around like 15 to $20.
Hmm.
We'd like to think of things as price per kilometer or price per mile
Yeah.
is a better way often to look at that data. And in markets like New York, it can be quite high, right? You
Yeah.
could be paying like $6, $7, $8 per mile that
Yeah.
that you go. So like, if you're driving 2 miles in Manhattan is a lot, like actually
Yeah.
to drive. Like it will take you, it's like it takes about 10 to 12 minutes to even drive a mile. Like,
Yeah.
so that's like 20 minutes in the car and like,
Mm.
$60 for a ride or so, often higher because of surcharges that you're seeing from the specific city. It's market like San Francisco, you can get a ride for $14
Mm.
and that's a good deal. Right.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned everybody probably wants to know, oh, what's cheaper? What's more expensive? Like I asked, and what's the average? But you are right that there is a lot of variability regionally, market by market, regulation, insurance. I mean, New York City, you mentioned, they're the only Uber X and kind of Lyft Classic market that is highly regulated, where every driver needs, $5 to $10,000 a year commercial insurance, TLC licensing, right? I don't need that in LA. I can just Harry can go out on Saturday night and drive with his personal car and Uber will cover me, right? So obviously there's, the per mile cost of a ride in New York City is more expensive than somewhere like LA or San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen and from conversations with some rideshare companies that have been thinking about entering the US or have entered the US and then left, in commercial insurance cost is often
Hmm.
the factor, right? And that's figured into the price. And I think that often consumers are not aware that, they're insured in the car,
Hmm.
should something go wrong, and that's a good thing for
Yeah,
them.
definitely. What's the trend been when it comes to rideshare pricing? I feel like we've seen, Uber, I think they publish a chart every time they do quarterly earnings that they're making more and more money. And it seems like, from the research I've seen, they're charging passengers more, paying drivers less. They have a high supply of drivers, I think, in theory. And, then their earnings results sort of show it. Is it, I mean, I guess, and that's kind of what people complain about too. Uber and Lyft are too damn expensive these days. Is that what general trends have you seen around pricing over the past few years and maybe why?
Yeah. I mean, Uber and Lyft are no longer subsidized by VC
Mhm.
earnings.
They got to
And
make
the
money now.
most, consumer economy that we've grown up around from the 2010s, right? Things have changed
Mhm.
for public companies, and they have to increase their cash position. And we've seen prices go up across the board.
Mm.
There's no question about it. Uber and Lyft are more expensive. They're significantly more expensive in New York, where prices have increased, like, anywhere from like 15 to 20% if you compare it to pre-pandemic
Yeah.
pricing. And then market by market, that definitely changes, but the overall cost of a ride has significantly increased. And ironically, though, the market is also increasing. So consumers are
Mm.
more willing to continue to pay, like that the demand has not gone down, right? Even as prices have increased. And you will hit a ceiling at some point, but we know that the rideshare market's expanding, and car ownership is going down, and this industry is like, going to continue to grow at, it's like, maybe like analyst estimates like vary, but prices have significantly increased, especially in the US, especially in major markets, and especially in a place like New York City. On average in New York, you're really paying like it could say 20, but on most people are paying about $30 a ride.
Mhm. So, I mean, what's the practical advice for rideshare customers? I mean, I think the obvious advice is to download the Obi app and, compare prices between Uber and Lyft to save some money. I mean, what have you found? Obviously your users are happy to compare prices. What do you think about like the total rideshare customer base? What percent of, the whatever 10, 100 million monthly users that Uber has in the US, like how many of them do you think, compare prices, and do maybe half though just like, hey, Uber, I always open the app, I pay whatever I pay, or I open Lyft and I have my default. How do you think about like the overall rideshare customer market?
Yeah, I would say that what we've seen from our data is that 20% are loyal to
Got it.
the rideshare company that they pick. So 1 out of 5.
Either
And
Uber or Lyft.
either
Loyal.
Uber or Lyft,
Got
yeah.
it.
On average, we're seeing about 20% loyalty to a specific provider, and that there's a behavioral, like, like behaviorally, like if it's like, anything less than a $5 price difference,
Yeah.
they're still gonna go with the provider that they prefer,
Got it.
right?
Or they might not
And
even check the other one.
them, yeah, or they are, overall users are consumers are just they're opening just one app and using it. That's accelerated by the loyalty programs that
Yeah.
like, Uber One, Lyft Pink. That's like, that ties into it. But even if you do have a loyalty program, we do see that, and when you have personalized discounts to you,
Mhm.
people are still comparing
Yeah.
prices. So I would say though, like, inertia is always a thing. And,
Mhm.
even I late at night, like I was telling my team this, that like I have a preference for one of the companies over the other. I once and I tend to just pull it out and use it, like, because I'm not as interested in comparing prices,
Yeah.
like, if it's late in the evening or something like that. But we do see that, about 60% of users are very actively comparing prices. What's happened now in the market is as there's been new entrants, there's more of a desire to see, like, well, how prices compare across several apps,
Yeah.
and that actually is, like, accelerated Obi's growth significantly. The
Mm.
entrance of Empower, there's Rebel and Curb. I mean, no longer Rebel in New
Yeah.
York, but there's Curb, Waymo in San Francisco, LA, Phoenix. We're seeing like lot of interest
Hmm.
in those apps in that company in particular. So there is, we're starting to see more as there are more choices, there's more of a desire to compare.
Definitely. So you mentioned the loyalty programs. I feel like this is, I'm sure I'm signed up for Lyft Pink. I might even get it free through Chase credit card or something like
Right.
that. And, I've got my Uber One, but I don't feel like the discounts are huge. Like I've been a little surprised that one of the companies hasn't aggressively said, hey, we're going to give you huge discounts on Uber rides and Uber Eats and, pair it with an Instacart or grocery delivery. I mean, I know Uber One and these loyalty programs are growing immensely, but I feel like it's very challenging for the companies to compete on a ride by ride rate basis, right? Someone who, okay, maybe I take Uber, maybe I take Lyft. They obviously want to lock you in for a month. Do you think there's a lot of opportunity on the loyalty side of things? Have they kind of just scratched the surface? Where are they at there?
I think there's probably a lot more opportunity than we realize. I remember reading, I think it was Lyft's quarterly earnings report or annual report, I can't remember, saying that like, partnerships and loyalty programs are really driving a lot of growth. And I
Yeah.
would imagine it's the same for Uber, and that, the discounting may increase as
Mm,
subscription costs, and maybe they charge more for subscriptions, and they can kind of pass that back to discounts and savings overall. Like, I don't have numbers offhand for you, but yeah, like,
yeah.
what I think people don't realize is that, if you're only saving $2 or $1, that's coming from the margin of the ride share fee
Mm,
usually. It's not necessarily coming out of the driver's share of it. And so the difference, and, maybe only, New York, I think on average, they're earning like, $3 to $8 a ride sometimes overall, if you're looking at public city data. So that's like, you're never going to get that much of a discount necessarily. It just depends on what's going on at the moment, and also supply and demand, right? If there are a lot of cars, you're gonna see a much bigger discount
yeah.
than if it's a high demand time.
For
You're
sure.
not.
So you talked a little bit about international expansion and international markets and how I guess a fragmented, multiple players is kind of good for comparing prices. I mean, Uber has a big presence internationally and now Lyft is expanding internationally. But I think talk a little bit about the international landscape because I feel like there are a lot of pretty big, Uber competitors, local rideshare operators in places like Europe. There's some real competition, right, abroad.
That's been the most fascinating thing I've worked on since joining the company, is looking at
Hmm.
what's happened nationally. And I think that it's a thriving market, it's a growing market. Areas like the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Africa, like, they're expanding rapidly. Sao Paulo in Brazil is one of the largest rideshare markets in the world, and that's growing significantly. And I think that what we've seen overall is that major players like Bolt growing very, very fast, rumored to
Hmm.
be doing an IPO. InDrive, very popular
Yeah.
in African countries, and like, in the areas that they're in. And that's, people aren't familiar with InDrive. It's a bidding process. So
Hmm.
you give the driver a quote of what you want to pay, and they have a right to accept it or negotiate with you within the context of the app. That's proved really popular. Yango in the Middle East, major player. And then, you have Lyft's merger with, or acquisition of Free Now
Right.
in Europe. So you'll start to see like those resources, and I think Free Now become a much bigger player there. The one difference internationally is that there's a lot of regulation. So some countries, like, it really is just taxis,
Mm,
right? Like, the kind of market that you're seeing in the United States is really only replicated in places like London,
mm,
Paris, Poland is becoming a huge rideshare market. Dubai, we were there for the Mobility Live conference as a team, and, everyone just uses Cream because
mm,
it's a taxi and it's a regulated price. If you really want an, I think with rideshare in certain markets, like in the Middle East is a good one, because there's regulation, because there's price caps, there's an affordable way for people to get around, right?
mhm,
And they have designed a level of feature set that is really custom to that culture. So, you can have a female rider if you're
mm,
in a cream. And that's been a program that's been in place, like, for a while. They're rolling things like that out in the US and other places now with Uber and Lyft, but
yeah,
that's like really culturally tied to that region, and there are, like, religious and other reasons for it. So I think, like, those are the things that I've been impressed on, like, that there's been a lot of innovation tied to local usage, local patterns, and local culture, and that using rideshare like using Yango, for example, these are considered higher end options.
mhm,
Like, right? Like, it's not a commodity in the same way, like, taking a taxi is a commodity, whereas, like, "Oh, I wanna have a nicer car, I'm gonna call a Yango," for example. I'm Indian, right? When I'm in India, when I use rideshare, I'll sometimes use, like, get on the back of a scooter.
mhm,
Like,
yeah,
you can do that with Uber, right? So there's a lot of options, and I think price variability is huge,
mhm,
right? So pricing, it looks really, really different It's much cheaper actually anywhere outside the US to take these services, and they're very custom to the market that you're in. We're seeing a lot of interest in the African markets in places like Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, real growth areas like population-wise and I think income-wise for that
Yeah.
region. So there's a lot of interest there. And then in the mi in like, and then there are markets like Korea where like there's just tons of providers. It's highly localized.
Hmm.
And, someone like us, like we haven't broken through yet. Like,
Yeah.
we're building it
So
out.
I guess from the OB kind of app and company perspective, how do you look at these international markets? Do you want your users to be able to, fly into Paris, open the OB app, and then they can see all the different options and book a ride, sort of similar to how they would do here? Or how do you look at these? Because it seems like there's a lot of companies and a lot of different options going on.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that from kind of a building point of view?
Yeah, we've integrated over 20 international providers now into
Oh,
our
cool.
and we're going to be having more. So for an international traveler, OB is a great option
Mm,
because you really can use the app in Cape Town, in Lagos, in Dubai, in
hmm.
Singapore, in Paris, right? You can use it globally. You can use it in Australia and you'll see those options for you. So it's great for international travelers, but we're also focused on local audiences, right? That
Hmm.
want to compare prices. Like I said, there's regulation in place in many of these places that creates price caps where it's
Hmm.
like, price comparison isn't as relevant.
Yeah.
But where it is, or if you want to like sort of look at multiple options, we're there for that
Yeah.
audience.
And so, what is your relationship like with all of these rideshare companies? I'm sure some are probably open arms, maybe others, don't want to be listed on the apps. How do you kind of handle each relationship, or what's your sort of ideal scenario too?
I mean, I laugh, I think about that old Facebook status. It's complicated. Incredibly how we think about it. Like we're partnered with some rideshare companies. We have some rideshare companies buy data from us, some give us
Hmm.
API access. Like it's a mix. It's a real mix out there. Very similar to how Skyscanner and Kayak got
Hmm.
started with airlines.
Right.
Their, meta search it's a great thing for the consumer.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And we are a meta search platform and play. And, I think that there's always going to be a level of healthy tension
Hmm.
with providers themselves because you may be encroaching on market share in some instances, you may be expanding market share in others
Yeah.
or overall.
I mean, the biggest, I guess, in theory, right? The biggest company would not want to be on an aggregator. They would want their users coming to them directly, or,
I think even the smallest company wants that.
yeah,
It's
that's true. They want them coming, right? But obviously, having that access to demand and people who are looking at rides is kind of where the value is. And you've mentioned that we've kind of teased it a few times. So I think it's about time to bring them into the conversation, Waymo, because obviously they're the biggest, kind of newest, flashiest entrant in the rideshare space. Maybe we'll start with this pricing report that you guys released. And I think
Sure.
the big stat that stood out to me was that Waymo rides are 30 to 40% more expensive than similar priced Uber and Lyft trips, and customers are willing to wait longer for the rides too. So I think that was a pretty cool, that was kind of my takeaway. Talk a little bit about the data that you released and, sort of some of the findings from that report.
Yeah. So as we discussed, we have a strong data business where we sell insights, but we also create custom research and put a lot of research out there for free into the market. And we've been getting a lot of questions about Waymo. And what we found is we ran a pricing study. So we ran a simulated pricing study using our sort of internal tools, set the same routes across
Mhm.
Uber, Lyft, and Waymo, and ran prices across, San Francisco, Phoenix, and LA. And what we found was that Waymo was consistently pricier. There were
Got it.
longer wait times. And in the surveying that we found with consumers, they were fine with it.
Hmm.
We're okay with
Interesting.
waiting longer. 70% of people after taking a Waymo prefer the ride to having a driver in the car. We also found that 1 out of 2 fathers was willing to put their kid in the car with a
Mhm.
Waymo. It was a lower percentage with mothers, but they were willing to do that. Like there was just a real enthusiasm for the product there was an enthusiasm around the quality of the car, the ride itself, and the idea of being an early adopter around it. And, it's a great ride. It's a great experience. It's a great
Mm.
car. So consumers are willing to pay, ironically, more. Now, that being said, the markets that Waymo has rolled out in and where they're really thriving, like San Francisco, do not look like the rest of the country.
Mm.
So where that goes in terms of pricing, I think the pricing differential, I'll be very curious to see how it develops over time,
Yeah.
especially as there are more cars in the market, as demand grows, as there's more competition, obviously, potentially as well. In my last trip to San Francisco last month, I saw Zoox cars everywhere,
Mm.
uh, in a way that I'd never noticed them 6 months before, when I was there in February. But the most prevalent thing you see on the road these days, I feel like, is a Waymo if you're in that city. So yeah, so that's kind of the data set. And so we ran a very large survey of several thousand
Hmm.
people. And then we ran this pricing study. And the takeaways were the how much higher prices were
Yeah.
and how willing consumers were to pay them.
Yeah, I think that's what stood out to me most, as I mentioned, because I mean, the whole promise of AVs is that they're supposed to eventually be cheaper, right, than human driven rideshare. And I imagine that if I'm Waymo, this is a pretty bullish sign. I'm pretty happy that, wow, we're doing hundreds of thousands of rides per week right now. And everyone, like the product, well, the product people love, but from like traditional rideshare KPIs, right, the things that Uber and Lyft care about, like 3 to 5 minute pickup times. And of course, they want their pricing to be high, but compared to competitors, not that high, right? They don't want Uber to be way more expensive than Lyft and vice versa for the same ride, because then you might go to the other one. So I feel like it's a pretty good sign for Waymo that all these people are willing to wait longer and pay more. Because I think the average rideshare customer may not be willing to do that. What do you think?
I think that from the many, many conversations we have with consumers, there is a perception these days that wait times listed are not accurate, right? It always
For
like
Uber
wait
and Lyft.
times,
Yeah,
and
that's fair.
it takes a while to connect to the driver. That's wait time,
Yep.
like finding your driver, and then the driver actually showing up, right? So
Yep, that's fair.
I'm gonna there's an argument to be made that the amount of time you're waiting for a Waymo is actually, you might say, like it's a 5-minute wait time with one of the other providers, but you're actually probably still waiting the same exact amount of time,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Knack level to it that's missing. So
I
I
mean, it
think
is
that,
amazing how when you hit Waymo, when you hit request ride, it's like, okay, your Waymo's on the way, right? Versus Uber and
yeah,
Lyft, right? I mean, since they started a few years ago, they started showing drivers where you're going and how much the ride costs and all that. Now it does bounce around between a lot of drivers because, they're picky. Hey, I want this ride. I don't want to go there, right?
yeah,
So that experience isn't as great for the rideshare customers, right?
yeah, it's better for the drivers. It's not always great for the customer. And I think for the customer, then there's a perception if you have the type of customer that is just willing, has the ability to pay more,
Hmm.
there's the wait time starts to go away, right? And I think we know that wait time is not it's a factor, but it's not the deciding factor in a decision for a consumer to pick a car because Lyft Wait and Save is one of the most popular programs out there,
Yeah.
right? Like consumers when they Lyft Wait and Save, like especially what we've seen from us, like that's one of the most
Mm.
popular choices that they're making in selecting so they can save $1 or $2 or whatever it might be. So I think that when we look at that, like, I think that's definitely a factor. I think that, there are people who really prefer to not have to talk to the
Mhm.
driver, and they prefer that experience. I don't know what that says or means or anything else, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. And so that influences things also.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned that, you take Obi, the company takes a lot of this data and you work with rideshare companies around their pricing strategies. So I guess if we were looking at Waymo right now, and right now they're charging 30 to 40% more, people are waiting. What would you sort of advise them and tell them to do, in terms of pricing strategy? Like how would you say, hey, keep charging a premium, or how would you kind of advise them on the pricing strategy they're going after?
Our conclusion from the research that we did and from the report, both on the survey side of surveying consumers and also looking at the behavioral data and the pricing simulation data, what we found was that Waymo appears to be like a premium product in the
Yeah.
market, right? And in a way that, maybe Uber in particular had originally been conceived of, right? As like kind of black car service that you call on demand. And if you can maintain that identity, charge the prices, and continue to scale, why would you ever go back from that?
Yeah.
Why would, why would you? It doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense.
I think I'm on board with you there that, they should almost, I'm sure behind the scenes, they're working to reduce the cost of the vehicle and the technology. And to me, it seems like they should keep doing that, but keep all the margin, right? They should keep charging a 30 to 40% premium, keep letting people, maybe their power users, they have them wait a little bit less, but, the first time customers, the less, the more casual riders maybe get less preference on the algorithm, right? The routing algorithm, or they set up a loyalty program and kind of, give some extra benefits to their power users, but charge accordingly. Like, I think they probably don't want to lower prices anytime soon, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like I said, like, why would you lower prices if you see a willingness to pay?
Yeah.
And the willingness to pay, is there. I just heard the story actually from someone a company we're talking to partner with, and they were very excited to get off the Tesla list. They got off
Mhm.
the list. The car shows up. This is in Palo Alto, and had a human being. They were like, we don't want the ride, So
Yeah.
it's just like there's always going to be a segment of society that is very enthusiastic about adopting new technology, right?
Mhm.
And they drive adoption, they drive interest, and they can help kind of set prices and a standard that
Yeah.
then continues forward. And I think that Waymo has set a really high standard. People like it, and they're paying for it.
Yeah. So in Atlanta and Austin, the two most recent Waymo markets that they've launched and are giving paid driverless rides, you can only call a Waymo on Uber. So the product is called Waymo on Uber, and the pricing is the same as an Uber, right? Because you have to
Right.
call it on Uber. And if there's a Waymo available, they match you there. I mean, I guess the issue with that model is that it kind of limits their upside, right? They can't charge more than an Uber. They can't charge 30 to 40% more than an Uber if it's the same price as an Uber, right?
Right. Yeah. Or I would assume, and we don't have an analysis around it. So this is purely conjecture.
Hmm.
That, in the rides that Waymo is available, there is an opportunity potentially to just rise prices above.
Gotcha.
Like,
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay,
right.
so on the rides where a Waymo can fulfill it, they might charge more than normal, basically.
Like I said, this is conjuncture, but if I were pricing, that's what I would do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, I think Lyft just announced this, or Waymo and Lyft just announced this big partnership in Nashville. So they're going to be coming in 2026. And I thought this one was interesting because this partnership, you can still call for a Waymo ride on the Waymo app when it launches in Nashville, but you can also call for a Waymo ride on the Lyft app. So it's sort of a hybrid. And I wonder from a pricing perspective if the reason why they did this is because, hey, we'll get our power users to use the Waymo app. We guarantee that they'll get a Waymo. We'll charge them accordingly. If they want to kind of get the leftovers on the Lyft app, right? They can call a ride, not the leftovers, but they can call a ride on the Lyft app also, and that kind of opens up during other times or specific rides.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be curious to observe it. I'm not sure how it'll work out, because what we've seen in Atlanta and Austin is obviously it's just in one platform.
Mhm.
Sets up competition, but co-opetition in some way as well. So I'll be curious. What I found interesting, that Forbes piece that just came out that we were also quoted in,
Mhm.
they were saying that the Waymo rider is more affluent, right?
Mm.
They 65% make over $100,000 a year, and they specifically compared it to Lyft, saying that Lyft's audience is only 50% makes over $100,000 a year. I don't know how that translates to a market like Nashville, because market by market is really specific.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that what it's doing is that people that wouldn't naturally want to just go out and try an AV, if you put it on a Lyft app, you're creating brand exposure and experience exposure that will then maybe start to convert.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's actually one of the most valuable. The early adopters, they're all going to find Waymo. They're going to, they're into tech gadgets. They make a lot of money, apparently. That makes sense. But I think the kind of, more down the road, the average, the more casual person, like they may not download the Waymo app, but they already have the Uber app or they already have the Lyft app. And, maybe they get prompted, do you want to take an AV? You can save $5. And it's a perfect kind of introduction. It'll be on the right route and the right time. So yeah, that might be a very nice way for Waymo to introduce the product in, other markets with Lyft and Uber.
Yeah, and I tend to forget this because I live in New York City, and I lived here for more than 10 years. I only recently got a hand-me-down car. Alright. And so, like, rideshare is what you use. Use the
Mm,
rideshare, even taxis, you're calling them through an app, right? In markets like Nashville, a lot of people own cars also.
yeah,
So their frequency of usage is so
much
different,
more. Yeah.
and I think that then that exposure to the car and the experience becomes that much more important.
Yeah. So, kind of wrapping up on the AVs, looking at the landscape more broadly, we've got Waymo and Lyft partnering. May Mobility just announced a partnership with Lyft. You mentioned Zoox. They're now doing pay, or I guess they're not paid, but they're doing driverless loops in Vegas. So, that service is launching. Tesla is doing their thing. How do you see the AV landscape evolving, kind of from a customer's point of view and a pricing point of view?
I mean, I would think that it is natural at some point that prices are going to start to drop,
Hmm,
right? And we'll see
a little
that
more.
competition point between these providers. At the end of the day, more providers means more competition, which is always better for
Hmm.
customers.
Yeah.
Always better. We've seen essentially like Empower, and like, to give you a non-AV example, Empower entering the New York market
Mm,
and Empower growing so quickly because their prices are essentially 20 to 30% lower
mm,
than the other rideshare companies is significant. And I think that as you bring more providers on, people have more choices, and you will, like, you'll
yeah.
experience, like, itself, hopefully we'll start to experience maybe cheaper rides, or as prices come down, they'll just be taking more rides,
Yeah.
then allows for, like, revenue and the market to continue to grow. But overall, like, I think people are really excited about AVs. They
Yeah.
they like the experience. It's good to, it's a nice car. They're all brand new at
Yeah.
this point. What is it gonna look like a year or 2 years from now? We don't know. Like,
Yeah, the unique thing here is, right, in the past, whether it's international or abroad markets, you had Uber, or you had Lyft, or you had Uber versus Bolt, right? It was kind of two or three human services. And now in the US, you're going to have Uber and Lyft, right? Two very large human services, maybe a couple other small ones. And you're going to start to have Waymo, you start to have Zoox, you have May Mobility, right? There's Avride in Dallas launching, right? There's going to be a whole bunch of these other companies. And so I wonder what that looks like from a customer's point of view. I mean, I guess I imagine like an app like Obi will be more valuable to them, or, kind of there's going to be like six different options, though, basically.
yeah. Yeah. I think that, I heard an interesting theory from someone who said that they could see, should there really be a profusion of players in the market, that you will see, like, sort of something similar to a cell phone plan
Yeah.
where you're paying like a monthly fee to give you access at a certain price point, perhaps to a certain provider. And maybe there's a drive in subscription fees, loyalty
Hmm.
fees, or like that. Or we'll see what we saw in when the rideshare market was first starting, where there's a profusion of players and then eventually there's consolidation. But that may be many more years away. And the big difference here is that you have to be really well funded to do an AV, and these are all really large companies that are rolling AVs out. I think that, the ownership of fleets, the of bringing more cars on the road. I was very interested in Move, which has been invested in by Uber, entering the
Yeah.
US market to service and purchase Waymo fleets, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is it gonna do? How does that influence things? Does that become a business model for people that they just buy, for
Fleets of
future drivers?
AVs. Yeah.
Maybe they just buy AVs and put them on the platforms. But overall, I think the more that you have, more choice exists. Harder, maybe easier, harder to regulate. Not sure there, but definitely, I think it benefits the consumer.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Ashwini, I really appreciate you coming on, giving us an update on the business, everything that's going on abroad and internationally, and the impact of AVs on rideshare pricing going into the future. If folks want to learn more about Obi, download the app, see some of this data that you've released, what's the best place for them to go?
They could go to rideobi.com/blog,
Perfect.
where you're
All
looking to find.
right. Cool. Easy to find. All right, Ashwini, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Harry. I really appreciate it.